Welcome to the program. I'm Joke Rogers. Zimbabwe's President Robert Mugabe has made his first public appearance since the country's army took over on Wednesday. Mr. Mugabe walked slowly up a red carpet and joined the crowd in singing the national anthem, then opened the graduation ceremony at the country's Open University, where he is Chancellor. Neither Grace Mugabe nor Education Minister Jonathan Moyo, an ally of hers, whose house was reportedly raided by the military, were present. Mr. Mugabe's attendance at the graduation is an annual tradition, but few expected to see him there. His appearance at the ceremony makes it appear like it's business as usual. Meanwhile, a leader of war veterans in Zimbabwe says that President Mugabe and his wife Grace are finished, and the veteran leader should resign. At a press conference in the capital, Christopher Mutsamvangwa said the military had arrested the rot that was led by Grace Mugabe and her husband. They say a Mugabe must go rally has been billed for tomorrow.
President Robert Mugabe arrives at a university graduation ceremony in the capital, Harare, in his first public appearance since a military seizure of power by the army on Wednesday. Wearing a blue and yellow academic gown, the 93-year-old sits in a large wooden chair at the front of the hall, greeted by applause from the crowd as he declared the ceremony opened. After 37 years of absolute power, the veteran leader faces calls for him to step down from senior officials of the ruling ZANU-PF party. They say they are drafting a plan to dismiss him. If he refuses, he will be impeached. This comes a day after Mugabe was photographed meeting with the army chief behind the takeover that could ultimately remove him from power. Meanwhile, citizens of the country say they want the stalemate to end so that they can move on with their lives. However, all foreign journalists have been banned from entering the country. Harare's international airport announced that only foreign journalists with permission of relevant government agencies are allowed to enter, but no foreign journalist is able to get government permission with the current situation. The army's takeover on Wednesday signaled the collapse in less than 36 hours of the security, intelligence and patronage network that sustained Mugabe over 3 decades in power and built him into the grand old man of African politics.
Let's join Zimbabwean journalist Nigel Yamtumbu to talk more on this. Nigel, thank you for joining us on Network Africa.
Yes, it's my pleasure.
President Mugabe was seen in a photo shaking hands with the military. What really is going on in that country?
Well, President Mugabe made his first appearance today publicly. But yesterday, his motorcade was seen publicly for the first time since the military took over, or at least announced it's taking over. And what then happened is that they were involved with on talks with the general and an envoy sent by the South African president, Jacob Zuma. And while there isn't much official communication as to the details of that meeting, with the only official statements being issued out thus far by the Zimbabwe Defense Forces to just say that they are on course in resolving what it is it resulted in them taking the action they took. So, but there are also, of course, some unconfirmed reports and inside reports to say there has been a deadlock in the negotiations with. On one hand, President Mugabe reluctantly agreeing to resign, but on the other, raising some pertinent legal and constitutional question to that effect. They actually then had time to pause for photographs as much as they also had time for President Mugabe to appear in public today. I would say that all this is just for a public show. The reality of the matter is there is a deadlock in Zimbabwe.
Right. Do you see, the president actually resigning? You said there's a deadlock, the agreement is that he should step down and go. Then he's citing the constitution on the other hand. Do you actually see him going at the end of the day?
Well, I'll actually say it's too early to call at this point, at least based on two or so points. The first being that SADC, the South Africa Development Community, has called for an extraordinary summit to discuss this impact. And what that might entail, it may work to President Mugabe's advantage, because I do not see SADC really endorsing the move taken by the military. But on the other hand, there is increasing pressure for the president to resign. There are some members from his own party, ZANU-PF, reportedly 6 or so provinces have called on him to resign. There is pressure from civil society in the country that have also used this intervention by the military to also voice their position that President Mugabe has to resign. The opposition and the generality of Zimbabweans are calling on him to resign. So he has the constitution on his side, and even international law, as it were, and SADC to lean on. But he has he's been cornered by the army. He's been cornered by his own party. He's been cornered by the citizens, and that may be grounds that he could actually resign.
Right, thank you for that, Zimbabwean journalist Nigel Yamutumbu. Thank you for your time on Network Africa. Let's move on now. Despite the policy's partial ban on protests in the capital, the demonstrations have gathered near the airport to wait for the return of their leader, Raila Odinga, from an overseas trip. Police were checking vehicles earlier today headed from the city center to the airport in another attempt to stop demonstrations from building up. Mr. Odinga has called for a national resistance movement to protest the outcome of the repeat election, which was ordered by the Supreme Court. The court will rule on Monday, that's November 20th, on cases that seek to nullify last month's repeat vote. Two things could either happen. Judges could order a fresh vote or clear the way for the incumbent to be sworn in for a second term.